I'm here to listen. Why am I walking on this way?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Muse's AT Podcast, where you can relive my epic journey with me. This is Muse, and what follows is my Appalachian Trail story. Today's episode covers Saturday, June 28th, 2025. And today, we head into our next cozy interlude at the Hostel of Maine. I think of the Hostel of Maine as its own sort of little subset. If we've kind of broken this story up into chapters, and we'll get to eventually back to that, I think I kind of conceptually think where chapter 2 ends. We're in the middle of chapter 2. If you guys remember that thing I talked about at Food Drop way back in the wilderness. If we think about chapters, then within chapters there's scenes, and the Hostel of Maine becomes its own special scene. So I kind of can't wait to get into that. That'll be great. Before I go there, though, I want to talk a little bit about an experience I had just this past weekend. As this episode airs, it'll be 2 weekends ago. I had a cool experience because Carrie and I went over to Knoxville, and we were kind of mostly just visiting with Evan, a little bit with Dylan as well. As you remember, Evan, our son, and Dylan, his girlfriend, just kind of remind you who these people are. And we went out there and helped him move in. He's moving into a new place for this school year. And so we did help him move in. He didn't need nearly the same amount of help as Haley. Haley just has furniture and stuff. Evan's not there yet. So really, it just was a lot of just hanging out. So it was a great weekend. On the way back from there, Google Maps just randomly, right around Gatlinburg, tells us we need to exit from I-40. This ends up being really cool. So we end up going along US 70 for a bit. And I think I know why that was. They're probably, if it was the same closure or if it was just a similar closure on a different day, when we were driving to Knoxville, so we were going west from our home in Concord, North Carolina, we saw the other side of the road and there were these two basically construction vehicles, not really, like pickup trucks with the yellow lights, that sort of thing, and they just closed down the highway, and there was a line of cars behind them. And so I think what Google Maps was doing was having us avoid, like I said, either the same thing. They must have let those cars through at some point in time. I don't really know why they had it blocked. I might have been construction, something like that. I have no idea. But I think Google Maps was having us avoid that same thing. So it leads us down US 70, and as I start winding through US 70 and everything, something just felt kind of like home to me, and it was really cool. So I kind of realized that this was coming, I don't know, a half hour, maybe even 40 minutes before it got there, but eventually end up driving right past the Laughing Heart Hostel, which is no longer an operating hostel, is my understanding, but right past the Laughing Heart and into the heart of Hot Springs. So that's really cool because obviously it's a little less than a month now, a few weeks now past that I was there with Ratatouille and Shotgun. And of course it's, I don't know, 9 months ago that I was there with Silly Putty, Foggy Froggy, and Timber, and then ultimately all 7 of us had Thanksgiving. Basically where we were on trail was Hot Springs when we did that. So really kind of a cool place, a place that's close to my heart, right? So drive right through Hot Springs, and I say to Carrie, the Appalachian Trail's right there. And I just basically point to the sidewalk. I'm like, you can see the little markers. We didn't get out of the car. We just kind of drove real slow down Main Street there. And I'm just pointing out the markers on the sidewalk. And I'm like, that's actually the trail. We walk right through this town. And that was pretty cool to be able to point that out to her. And then I also pointed out the Iron Horse Station Inn. I was like, that's where I stayed with Ratatouille and Shotgun just a couple weeks ago. And that was pretty cool. It's kind of cool. One of the things that I really want to continue to do, and Carrie's got a connection with the trail anyway, because she visited me, 5 times while I was on trail, and then also was a key influence in my getting to the trail in the first place. So there's a lot of connection to the trail anyway, but I've been dreaming of just showing her bits of it and showing her bits of it that I experienced that she didn't experience with me necessarily. And so on the spur of the moment, I got to do that. And I got to say, that's where we were just a couple weeks ago. And there's the outfitter. There's the visitor center. There's the diner, these key places in Hot Springs that are part of that sort of Hot Springs story that now is the setting for two different scenes. So anyway, that was cool. And I actually picked a haiku from my past. These are all from my past that I think captures a little more of that than maybe even what comes. But then again, it also captures sort of all of it. So I think it's a good one. Today's haiku was written December 24th, 2018. Time passes, page turns. Past and present all combined. Blank pages remain. The picture with today's entry, I was actually half expecting, because I know the dynamic of this day, that I really couldn't use my phone at all. I was half expecting to get to this entry and find that there was no picture. But instead, I have a picture from the previous day, and I'm happy I do. So this is Justin and me. We're on the South Horn of the Bigelows. One of the things that you'll catch, and actually the next number of pictures are probably very similar. I'm flipping through because I can't help myself. There are going to be a number of pictures that are similar in the next week, because one of the things that I really liked, and I mentioned that I liked the MATC putting these peak signs, I would often take that selfie with whoever I happen to be with at that point, which is great. So previous entry, I was on the West Peak with Spicy and Ribbit. We got that picture. And this one, same day, a little bit later, I was with Justin on the South Horn. So there we are, Justin and me. There's some pine trees, and there's really just the sky in the background. There's not the sort of downward view that you get on some peaks. So that's about it. And the sign is angled a little bit. I'd actually zoomed in on it just to see if I could see the elevation, but the sign's angled funny, so I can't really see the elevation. So with that, on to this entry. June 28th, 2025. A cozy interlude. Start, Horns Pond Lean-Tos, Maine. End, Hostel of Maine, Carabasset Valley, Maine. Miles, 5.1. The picture is from yesterday, Justin and me on the South Horn in the Bigelows. The morning was wet and slow. I left camp just before 8, having called the Hostel of Maine yesterday from Avery Peak. They said the best timing was early afternoon. I was planning about 1 mile per hour for the 5 miles I had to hike to get to ME 27 today. I ended up hitting that almost precisely, starting out even slower, descending 2,400 feet on slick rocks for the first 3 of those miles. Once I got past the hard part, though, it was quite nice, even with the rain coming down. At one point, near where the difficult descent turned easy, Conrad and Justin caught up with me, and we said farewell. They will go on to finish their section hike, likely while I'm zeroing at the Hostel of Maine over the weekend. Later on, I would see Ribbit and Spicy at the hostel, though they were just in for the night, not planning to zero. The Hostel of Maine is a nice, cozy place. It has the feel of a ski lodge with its wood motif and comfy couches and recliners. Good place for a bit of a rest. All right, we're going to take a quick break to hear from the sponsors who help keep Muse's AT podcast on the trail. These are offerings that truly enhanced my thru-hike experience, so I'd really like you to check them out. Please look for and follow the links in the show notes to this episode. Looking forward to that lazy day on the couch, knocking down your Netflix queue and wondering what to wear? Quick answer, wear something else. Summit Ready Apparel is clothing built for those who scramble over jagged rocks, reach the peaks, and actually enjoy getting caught in a torrential downpour. If you're someone who doesn't mind the elements and has the grit to crush the next segment anyway, look no further than Summit Ready to match your restless trail spirit. Check out the catalog at summitreadyapparel.com and get ready for your next adventure. That's summitreadyapparel.com. Looking for your next great trail read? Walk Uphill is a powerful story about leaving the emptiness of modern corporate life behind and finding a completely new beginning on the Appalachian Trail. It's about discovering what life can look like when you embrace freedom, lighten your load, and take it step by relentless step. I actually read this book myself during a couple rest days in Gorham, New Hampshire, right after conquering the brutal terrain of southern Maine. I literally couldn't put it down. I read it from cover to cover in 2 days. The book chronicles the real-life events of the author, Bounce the Hiker, in a twisty, shocking, edge-of-your-seat story that even the most imaginative fiction writer couldn't make up. Just a quick content warning, there is definitely adult material in this book, so I wouldn't recommend buying it for your 10-year-old's birthday. But if you're looking for a gripping, raw trail adventure, I highly recommend Walk Uphill by Bounce the Hiker. You can find it easily on Amazon by searching Walk Uphill Book, or just click the direct link in the show notes of this episode. All right, so a couple of things that I know I want to do in this episode today. We'll start out with Far Out, because we have to get to the Hostel of Maine first. So let's do that. I actually did do the Far Out thing yesterday. It was probably obvious. I didn't actually call attention to it the same way, but I did spin through it. So let's go to our hiking day, those 5 miles. Starting at Horns Pond Lean-To, and our elevation at this point, at our start, is 3162. That is actually significant because we go down quite steeply. That's mile 183.3 at the start. So next time I get to something significant, let's take the mileage from there. There's a stream, that's not really significant, but there's a stream at 184.9. So we're at a mile and a half, and it's already 26:58. So we went up a little bit first, actually. But then we've gone a net down of 600 feet in the first mile and a half. Okay, here's where it gets steep. So from that stream at 184.9, the next thing I've got here is Cranberry Cream Campsite, which I probably just went through and didn't even know it, honestly. Mile 186.4. So we're talking another mile and a half, but now we've gone from 26:58 to 13:65. That's pretty steep, and even the steep probably felt extra steep because of the rain, because it was on those wet, slick rocks. One of the dynamics with the rain is this is actually the second day, the first one being the road walk around the Piscataquis, but the second day that I'm actually going to track my mileage on my Garmin watch, because don't really have the capability of using the phone, which is why when I went through that campsite, I was like, I doubt I even knew that I went through that campsite. But memory kind of serves a little bit. That is going to be right around where Justin and Conrad and I parted ways. So again, those guys were absolutely great guys. I can't believe I only knew them for 3 days. That's where I got into it a little bit last episode, but that is one thing that, especially as I get to these days where people are kind of in and out that feel like they had a larger part in my story, that's where I'm like, the time just seems completely, whether it's compressed or expanded or whatever, it just seems like there's a lot of time where there actually in reality was a little bit of time. The rain itself was, at first, it was quite treacherous, and I don't know that I ever had any kind of bad attitude about the rain or anything like that. I think it was fine. It was a thing, and I knew I was going to be slow because of it, because I'm slower downhill anyway, and especially when the downhill gets kind of steep. But then in this rain, you just had to be really careful, and everybody was slow that day. I think I left first of the people I knew, and there were more people at Horns Pond Lean-Tos as well. And I won't get into that because they're all people that, well, with one exception, there were people I didn't even meet. Even that one person, I will mention him. His name was Three Dog. He was a pretty cool guy, but I will never meet him again or anything like that. So not really much to say other than he was there with his dog, one of his dogs, but then he had tattoos of 3 dogs, which is why his trail name. So back to the rain. By the end of the hike, though, I was enjoying the rain. And one of the funny things, and maybe this is Haley's influence on me, it very well could be, but by and large, on the hike, I tended to enjoy the rain. I don't know that I caught on to that very quickly, though, because if rain was coming, I certainly tried to avoid it. I would certainly dread it, all of that. But then once I'm getting rained on, I've got no problems at all. And I just remember sitting there standing actually at Main 27, waiting for Pops, and just standing there in the rain, and actually standing there with like my arms out, almost like I was catching the rain, kind of saluting the rain in a way, or maximizing the space that the rain could hit me. I don't know. But I was there, arms out with this big goofy grin on my face, and Pops comes up, and Pops, so this is the same Pops. Pops is his trail name. His name is Keenan. You would have heard about him actually a fair amount in Ratatouille's interview way back, episode 6, right? We're on episode, 38 now? So it's going to be a good while ago that we've really talked about Pops. But he's a pretty excitable guy anyway. So he's coming in, and he's like all sunshine and everything, because he probably thinks he's going to have to cheer up a hiker at that. But then what he found was somebody just as positive as him at the time. So it's kind of a bit of a surprise, and a pleasant surprise to him, I think. I believe I remember him expressing something like that. But then we had some excited back and forth. I got to know Pops a little bit on the way back to the hostel. One of the interesting things about the AT as it goes through Maine is that it seems to be almost divided by state or U.S. highways, and we're coming to another one of those. Maine Route 27, which could take you to Stratton. I believe Stratton would have been north and Carrabassett Valley south, if I've got that right, but that now is where we are. So I thought it'd be interesting to go through those chunks right now. So going southbound as I did, the first stretch is going to be Baxter State Park to Maine Route 15. And Maine Route 15 is going to bring you to the town of Munson, as you know. And some key landmarks in that area, Baxter Peak, Rainbow Lake, the 100-mile wilderness. The next little short section is going to be Maine Route 15 to U.S. Route 201, Munson to Caratunk. And you're going to cross Moxie Bald, Horseshoe Canyon, I don't remember that one. And then on the other side of Route 201, you're going to have the Kennebec River Ferry. And then you've got US 201 to Maine 27, where I am now. And that bit's going to be Pierce Pond and the Big Oil Range. Maine 27 to Maine Route 4. Route 4 is going to be Rangeley. So that's going to be either Stratton or Carrabassett Valley, depending on which way you went, to Rangeley is going to be your 27 to 4. And at that point, you're going to pass the Crockers, Spalding, Saddleback Ridge, and I don't see it on this readout, but also Sugarloaf. And then you've got Rangeley to Grafton Notch. So that's Maine Route 4, and then it has a / Maine Route 17. I don't know why that's the case, but over to Route 26. And now that I'm looking at this, I think Justin and Conrad were going all the way to 26. I think they were done at Grafton Notch, but can't hold me to that, although I don't know who you're going to check it against. Maybe you know them, or maybe you are them. Hi, Justin and Conrad, if you are. That is going to have the Height of Land, Bemis, and Baldpate Mountains. And then Maine Route 26, so Grafton Notch. And Grafton Notch is really, we'll talk about it when we get there, but that's where the White Mountains actually start. They actually start in Maine, but most people don't think about that until the New Hampshire stretch, where it's really kind of manicured, but you're also into the Hutt system. But I think geologically that the Whites really start in Maine. I'll look that up when we get there. Anyway, Maine Route 26 to US Route 2, which is taking you into Gorham, and that's going to have the Mahoosic Arm and Mahoosic Notch, Gentian Pond, and of course across the New Hampshire border. So that's kind of cool. You're always aiming for the next big road crossing in Maine. Well, you're aiming for a number of things. Obviously, you're aiming for these mountains and stuff too, and these towns, but the road crossings really kind of define your stretches in a way as well. So I thought I'd bring that in. And actually, I'm remembering, because I told you I've been recently re-listening to some of the podcasts. I don't know where I got it, but I accurately, on the way into Munson, called that route Route 15. For whatever reason, we're referring back to it a day out of Munson. I called it Highway 3, and I don't even know what Highway 3 is. Actually, Highway 3 is a highway in my hometown here, so that bled into the podcast accidentally. So that's Maine Route 15 that we're talking about in Munson. All right, with the rest of this particular episode, what I really want to do is talk about who's there with me. And I actually have an ulterior motive for doing this. So the thing that we'll do next episode is talk about what the Hostel of Maine is like, what arriving at the Hostel of Maine is like. And that'll be good. We'll have a couple things to do next episode because next episode's also the first time I went to church on trail, and this was its own sort of special experience. So that is coming up as well. But the balance of this episode, let's talk about who was there. I mentioned Keenan or Pops, and I actually mentioned a little bit about him already, so I won't go into too much detail about him disposition-wise. He's a very happy, jolly guy. Well, I guess I did just re-say it, but that's okay. He's also there running the hostel with his wife and his baby, and I don't know what the ownership structure of the hostel was. Normally, the person running the hostel, you'd call them the hostel owner, except in this case, I know that wasn't the case. And so the main two people running this hostel, neither of them were the owner, were Pops and a guy by the name of Justin. Justin, obviously not the same Justin that I was just hiking with for a little while. I hope that was obvious, but anyway, not the same Justin. Anyway, sorry, back to Pops, because I'm not actually done with him. He was a prior through hiker northbound who stopped at Bethel. So he actually went to Maine, and one of the reasons, it wasn't his only reason, but one of his reasons for running a hostel up in Maine was that he wanted to, at some point, finish up. And possibly at some point finish up with his wife, I think. Or she was talking about, I know because he said this during one of my rides with Pops. I'll have multiple rides with Pops. But during one of those rides, he mentioned to me that she even talked about possibly starting over. And he wasn't totally on board with that yet because he's like, I only have this little bit left. But anyway, there was a little bit of a finishing up the trail, which is what kind of landed him here. His wife's name was Jenna. She helped run the hostel for sure. She was doing a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, and I probably worked with Jenna during my stay there as much as I worked with Pops. They were very much a partnership. And then Justin was there as well, and he also was in there doing the stuff. He seemed to do, like, of the division of labor, if you will, Jenna was probably doing more of the domestic stuff around the hostel because there's a lot of just cleaning and laundry and flipping beds and stuff like that. And that felt like that was mostly Jenna. She had help with it too. There were a couple of other workers there. I don't remember their names. I vaguely remember one of them may have been called Mike. But anyway, let's go back to I don't remember their names. But then Justin was more administrative, it seemed like. And it kind of seemed like Pops was almost more hiker-facing, if that makes sense. Like he would be the one to do all the shuttles and all of that. So that's kind of who those folks were. As far as other hikers, I do meet a couple of other key hikers here, and we'll get into that in a moment. First, the ones who I already knew. So Spicy and Ribbit, as I noted, stayed there that night. The other hiker that I already knew, ran into again, wasn't necessarily expecting to because I'd lost touch with her, was Won't Get Up Will. Won't Get Up Will was last year attempting the Northeast 115, same thing she's on trail doing this year. And I need to catch up with her because I haven't checked in with her for a little bit. She was kicking butt last time I talked to her, and she's going by Goldilocks this year. She's got a new trail name. Her trail name is Goldilocks. But last year she was Won't Get Up Will. And I think that Yes, I remember that Spicy, Ribbit, and Won't Get Up will all leave the next day. They'll all leave on Sunday. Spicy and Ribbit just stayed for the night. They didn't zero there. They would end up taking their zero a little bit further on trail, as we talked about in the interview. And then Won't Get Up Will, I don't know whether she zeroed there or not. She was there before me, and so she may have. But in any case, she left the next morning as well. And I just remember chatting with her in the comfy chairs because there's comfy chairs there at the Hostel of Maine. But I'll get into, again, that next episode. The folks I met there, first I'm going to mention the legend. Not that she has a large part in my overall story necessarily, but just because she was the hiker that I probably coincided with the most while I was there. Like, she ended up being in my shuttle into town because there's this general store where you go and do some resupply or possibly even get a little bit of food there. But then she also shared my shuttle back to trail on Monday. And The legend was a section hiker, and she was almost done. She was soon to have to go back to work, and she was kind of one of those hikers out there for the athletic endeavor. I remember that very much about her. I also remember there is going to be a key lime pie involved, and she was very happy to share some key lime pie with me. And then the last two folks that I'm going to meet, and I met them together, they were hiking together into the Hostel of Maine. They end up kind of splitting ways a little bit further on down trail, but they are both key people in my Appalachian Trail story, and they're people that I'll meet a couple times, and they separately will make up the next two interviews. So that's going to be really cool. So first, I am going to introduce, just because next episode on Friday, we're going to be talking to her, I'm going to introduce Pastor Frank. You've heard from Pastor Frank before. She was at Trail Days because that whole trail family was at Trail Days. And it's funny when I talk about these folks, like if I talk about Frogger or Daddy Longlegs or Pastor Frank, or, I may as well name them all, Big Pimpin' or Nature Boy. If I talk about any of those folks, my wife will get totally confused. She's like, you talk about them a lot. They're not in your trail family. They are in your... And I was thinking about that as I was coming to this episode, because we've crossed paths with them even in the podcast quite a few times. I would almost call them like our trail cousins or something like that. They didn't generally hike with me. I crossed paths with them a few times, so they're not in my trail family. They're not the Slowbos, but there was a lot of interplay between those two trail families, and they're also good friends. And so anyway, that's that trail family. But then Pastor Frank herself, and you heard a lot about Pastor Frank, especially a little bit in Marco Polo's interview, but also in Daddy Longlegs' interview. And she, at this point in the trail, was just gunning for it. Like, I'm going to guess she's doing 20-mile days in Maine, and that's like, nobody does that. But Pastor Frank, a PCT thru hiker, now on the Appalachian Trail, she hit it hard at the beginning. And you even heard me, and this would be both Big Pimpin' and Pastor Frank, when I was talking at the Wicked Chicken, that they just flew by me in Vermont later on. And I had absolutely no idea that Pastor Frank would be behind me, or Big Pimpin' for that matter. But part of that is, and part of what, Pastor Frank was going so fast for, was that she had a number of engagements off trail during her thru hike. So she had probably as many side quests as I knew anybody to have. And that was also the reason I saw her again in Vermont. Now, hiking with Pastor Frank at this time was somebody you've heard about a lot in this podcast. And that is, we are finally meeting Bounce to Hiker. He ends up being a big part of my Appalachian Trail story as well. For one, I would end up hiking with him for about a half a day here, just a couple days out of leaving the Hostel of Maine, but I also shared a shelter with him the previous night. So not only did I talk with him a ton at the Hostel of Maine, get to know him, I also then did the same at that shelter. And the other thing about this whole next week, too, that made it to where I was kind of, you could say, spending quality time, is that I had to go super slow out of Carabasset Valley. And we'll get into that a little bit, but I set up my next week. I was actively trying to only cover 30 miles. So I had this huge slowdown. So I'm chilling at this shelter. Bounce gets into the shelter, and we just cut up for the whole rest of the night from probably 3 p.m. on or something like that. I learned during that time that he has a book. And my next big stop, my very next big stop would be in Rangeley with Carrie and Evan. But my next big stop that I didn't have family that I was visiting would be the town of Gorham. So one of the things I did while I was in Gorham was I looked up Bounce's book. And I started reading this, and I didn't really know what kind of expectations to have or whatever. I was completely enthralled by it. And I ended up, to my surprise, finishing it up in a day and a half. something like that. I was in Gorham for a while. You've heard a little bit about that already, and obviously you'll hear more about it as I get there. But a day and a half-ish, I was just laying on the couch reading Bounce's book. Awesome book. I left a review, which actually isn't, I don't normally leave reviews, but at the same time, I not only really enjoyed this book, I'd also met the author and felt I had a connection with the author. So I left a review for the book, and you can see that, I suppose, probably on Amazon if you want to see Muse's review of Bounce's book. But anyway, I then later would run into Bounce, not for a long, long time. And actually, this would be the next time I see Pastor Frank as well. Well, sorry, there was the time in Vermont, but then the next time after that I see Pastor Frank as well would be at the Devil's Backbone Brewery. The event was called Neropalooza, and it was the hiker get-together that will become kind of a big goal of mine a little bit later in the hike. So we'll talk about that, but we're talking about right outside of the Shenandoahs. And on trail, I was in the middle of the Shennies at the time. Well, that was who was with me there at the hostel, because there are other people that I'll talk about next episode there in town, but that's because I have this cool experience tomorrow. So in any case, that's who's with me at the hostel that I really want to highlight, because the truth is there were a ton of people at the hostel. The hostel was absolutely hopping. There were a bunch of nobos. There was like a dad and his two daughters who just wanted to check out a hostel. And I remember that. And Bounce and I both kind of laughing a little bit and saying, this isn't the typical hostel, because this is a little bit, it's just nice for a hostel. Just, I'll say it that way. Sorry, hostel owners. Your hostels are very nice, but there's a finished upscale quality to the Hostel of Maine. We'll get into it like I said we would. And there was also, there was just a ton of people in and out. But those are the folks that really kind of colored my experience of the Hostel of Maine. And we will, as I mentioned, we're going to catch both Pastor Frank and Bounce in the next two interviews. By the time Pastor Frank left trail, she had developed a bit of a relationship with Frogger, who we've already talked about. So they are, well, we'll get into that a little bit more in the interview. So I'm not going to give away too much, but needless to say, Pastor Frank and Frogger are both in the next interview on Friday that we're talking about. And I'm really excited to finally be getting both of these interviews actually out there. The one this Friday is absolutely awesome. The one next Friday will be Bounce's interview. That's absolutely awesome as well. And yeah, great. So that's kind of how we're going forward from there. Next week, you'll really kind of hear about really the remainder of my Hostel of Maine stay, and then kind of settling into this sort of cozy week that I have coming up. Next episode is, as I mentioned, the interview with Pastor Frank and Frogger. Until then, this has been Muse, and you have been listening to Muse's AT Podcast. Thank you for walking with me, and happy trails.